And I want to talk to you about all of those developments. But I think you followed a story that now really looks like a canary in the coal mine, which is the case of Julian Assange. And when I say you followed it, and I want you to talk a little bit about this, I think a lot of people will think like, oh, that story was covered a lot. It was in the news a lot. But as you pointed out, when you were covering some of the hearings and other things, the press really kind of only jumped into this story at sensationalistic moments. They were not on a lot of the calls. But anyways, can you talk a little bit about how you kind of got into the Assange story and what it meant to follow the story and how it ultimately ended? I should say that you wrote this all up in a great book called Guilty of Journalism: The Political Case Against Julian Assange, a great book I've read. But can you talk a little bit about kind of your relationship with WikiLeaks and Assange as a journalist?
Yeah, thank you for that, Nolan. This was a book that was the culmination of 10 to 15 years of reporting that I had been able to do either at Firedog Lake, or I had a media organization, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Shadowproof. And we spent a lot of time documenting what was going on. In this case against Julian Assange was a culmination of a lot of what we had seen. You could go back to when President George W. Bush entered office, and in the final weeks that he was there, some of the crackdowns on journalism that came from reporters at the more prominent media outlets actually covering the excesses of the administration, abuses of power. And then there were crackdowns that led after that. And then you had President Barack Obama come into power, and there was a incredible escalation by the Justice Department when it came to using the Espionage Act, weaponizing it against the press, going after sources to identify and then eventually prosecute and put them in jail. And you had more people prosecuted under the Espionage Act than all previous presidents combined when Obama was in office. Donald Trump was handed that machinery when he had his first term, and he also prosecuted a few people. And one of the people he indicted and chose to indict that Obama had chosen to pass on indicting was Julian Assange. And as you're saying, it's a canary in the coal mine. I think on one hand, we can connect it to the moment, to the present, just by the fact that Julian Assange, who is free now, and every day that I can say that, I'm ecstatic to know that he's no longer being held in high security prison in London, awaiting extradition to the United States. But we just saw in the last week or so that he was leading a march with his wife Stella in Australia against the destruction that is unfolding in Gaza, against the starvation that's being imposed collectively on all of these people. And when he was released, he actually went before a body in Europe. Unfortunately, I can't remember the specific body, but he went before this European body, and it was the first time that he spoke about his case since his release. And he was very clear that the thing that troubled him most now was that we were seeing the live streaming of massacres on almost a daily basis. Because if you recall anything about the WikiLeaks story, what catapulted them to prominence in 2010 was the publication of something known as the collateral murder video that showed an Apache helicopter attack in Baghdad in 2007. And you had a couple Reuters journalists in that video who were killed by the U.S. military. And then afterward, there's a father and his two children, and they drive up in a van. The father tried to rescue or help those who were wounded, and ended up being basically the target of a double tap strike. And by double tap, I mean that there's an actual tactic in the U.S. military that they use when people are coming to rescue those who have been hit, that they bomb those people that are coming to rescue the targeted individuals. And so in that case, like what we're looking at here with Assange, and as you reflect on where we find ourselves, is basically that it's not going to be anything stunning if Donald Trump goes forward with the prosecution of somebody at the New York Times or the Washington Post, or let's say even CNN or CBS News for that matter. Although now they're captives, so maybe they won't be turning against Donald Trump after that merger. But Uh, just to say that any individual who maybe thought that their general counsel of their media organization, which is their lawyer, could protect them just by getting the Justice Department to recognize that they would fight subpoenas, they would not comply with leak prosecutions. The Justice Department did away with these rules that were on the books that were intended to actually protect your confidential news gathering materials from being rifled through by FBI agents for the purposes of criminal investigation. So, we can parse this into two bits. Like, one, I'm saying that reporters now have less protections to stop the FBI from intruding into their news gathering to further their own criminal prosecutions. But now they also have less protection, I think, given the success of the uh, Julian Assange prosecution, or the message that is sent by the Julian Assange prosecution to prevent the government or discourage the government from simply indicting them in order to silence their reporting. And so that's why, while I was covering this, and I think while you've been discussing it and others like us who understood the need for media solidarity, we had said, you all in any of these institutions that take journalism seriously need to make this a regular story that you're covering, because you could be the target at any moment. Sure, people like myself are probably more vulnerable than somebody at the New York Times. People who are on the streets right now documenting the LAPD and being arrested in the like around midnight after they've been shot with rubber bullets are probably more vulnerable to attacks by the press than even me. But that being said, I don't think there's anything to stop Donald Trump and his administration at this moment. It's fairly clear that anybody who wears a press jacket or has a press card is going to be a potential target of his administration.